You ever convince yourself of something so completely that you'd swear on your life it was real, only to find out later you were staring at absolutely nothing? Like when you're scrolling through someone's profile at 2 a.m., building entire relationship scenarios in your head with a person you've never even spoken to, or when you see your crush from across the room and suddenly every smile, every glance, every gesture becomes a sign that they're into you, when really they're just being a human. We do this thing where our desires don't just cloud our judgment, they create entire alternate realities. Welcome to the Metaphor Mindset, where we crack open ancient wisdom and watch it spill all over modern life. Today's story? It's about a man who climbed a tree to watch something that was never even there. And before you think this doesn't apply to you, stick around, because this one's gonna sting a little. So picture this. There's a man walking along a path on a hot afternoon, mind wandering the way minds do when you're alone with your thoughts. He's passing by this grove, and through the trees he sees what looks like a pool of water, crystal clear, catching the sunlight. And in that water, he sees the shape of what appears to be a woman, completely bare, bathing. His heart stops. Then it races. That instant chemical rush floods his system, you know the one, and suddenly nothing else in the world matters except getting a better look. He moves closer, trying to be subtle about it, trying to act like he just happens to be walking this direction. But the angle's not quite right. The trees are blocking his view. He can see just enough to keep him hooked, but not enough to satisfy whatever's taken over his brain. So he does what any person possessed by desire would do. He finds the biggest walnut tree nearby, one with branches hanging over the water, and he starts climbing. He's not thinking about how ridiculous this is. He's not thinking about dignity or consequences, or the fact that he's literally climbing a tree like he's 12 years old. All he's thinking about is getting that perfect vantage point. He climbs higher, branch by branch, bark scraping his hands, leaves in his face, completely committed now. And finally, he gets to a spot where he can see clearly, where nothing's blocking his view anymore. And he sits there, for hours, perched in this walnut tree like some kind of fevered bird, absolutely transfixed, watching what he believes is this beautiful woman bathing below him. The sun moves across the sky. His legs cramp. His hands go numb from gripping the branches. But he doesn't move. Can't move. Won't move. He's convinced he's witnessing something extraordinary, something private and real, and meant just for his eyes. Every ripple in the water confirms what he wants to see. Every play of light proves he's right. But then something shifts. Maybe the sun hits a different angle. Maybe a cloud moves. Maybe his eyes just finally adjust to reality. Because suddenly, horrifyingly, he realizes there's no woman. There never was. What he's been staring at for hours, what he climbed a damn tree for, what he's been building fantasies around, is just a reflection. Light on water. Shadows and ripples creating shapes that his desperate mind interpreted as a human form. The pool below him is empty. Just water. Just light. Just his own projection of desire onto absolutely nothing. The shame hits him like a freight train. He climbs down from that tree, hands shaking, face burning, and he doesn't go home. He can't go home. He needs to understand what just happened to him, how his mind could betray him so completely. So he goes to find this counselor in the town, someone known for wisdom, someone who might help him make sense of how a grown man ends up in a walnut tree watching an illusion for an entire afternoon. He confesses everything, expecting judgment, expecting to be called a fool. But the counselor just listens, and when the man finishes his story, the counselor smiles, not with mockery, but with recognition. "My friend," he says, "you just learned the most expensive lesson a person can learn. You learned that desire doesn't show you what's there. Desire shows you what you want to be there, and your mind will fill in every single detail to make the illusion convincing. The woman you saw, she was never in the water. She was in your head. And that's the most dangerous place for any obsession to live, because in your head, she's perfect. In your head, the fantasy never has to meet reality." Now let's talk about why this story is basically a psychological MRI of the human condition. That man in the tree? That's every single one of us on social media. You're scrolling through Instagram and you see someone's curated life, their highlight reel, and your brain fills in all the blanks with fantasy. You see 6 photos from a vacation and you construct an entire narrative about how happy they must be, how perfect their relationship must be, how fulfilled their life must be. But you're staring at a reflection. You're watching light play on water and calling it reality. The actual person behind those photos? You have no idea. But your desire, your longing for what they seem to have, creates the illusion of certainty. You'd climb a tree to prove to yourself that what you're seeing is real, even though somewhere deep down, you know it's not. Or think about dating apps. You see a profile, 6 carefully selected photos, a witty bio that took 3 hours to write, and suddenly you've created an entire person in your mind. You're having conversations with them before you've even matched. You're imagining how compatible you'd be, how they'd laugh at your jokes, how they'd fit into your life. You're building a relationship with a reflection. And then you meet them in person and it's fine. They're a real human with morning breath and weird opinions about pineapple on pizza, and suddenly the illusion shatters. But here's the thing. The disappointment you feel isn't about them. It's about the gap between the person you created in your head and the actual human standing in front of you. Neuroscience has a term for this. It's called predictive processing. Your brain is constantly trying to predict what's coming next, and it uses your desires and past experiences to fill in missing information. This is useful when you're trying to catch a ball or navigate a familiar street, but it's disastrous when it comes to people and relationships and anything involving emotion, because your brain will literally invent details to make the prediction match your expectations. You're not seeing what's there. You're seeing what your neural pathways expect to be there based on what you want. There's this famous study from Stanford where they had people watch the exact same video of a protest. People who were pro-protest saw the police as aggressive. People who were anti-protest saw the protesters as violent. Same video, completely different interpretations. Because we don't perceive reality, we perceive our expectations of reality. We climb the tree expecting to see what we want to see, and our brains are more than happy to provide it. And let's talk about the climbing part for a second, because that's crucial. The man didn't just glance and move on. He committed. He invested energy, time, physical effort. He climbed higher and higher, literally and metaphorically, into his own delusion. That sunk cost fallacy meeting confirmation bias in the messiest way possible. The more you invest in an illusion, the harder it becomes to admit it's an illusion. Every hour in that tree was another reason to convince himself the woman was real. Because otherwise, all that climbing was for nothing. This is why people stay in bad relationships way too long. Why we defend purchases we regret. Why we keep scrolling through someone's social media even though it makes us miserable. We've already climbed so far up the tree that admitting there's nothing there feels unbearable. So we stay perched, cramping and uncomfortable, insisting we see something real. And modern life has made us all expert tree climbers. Parasocial relationships with influencers and celebrities. You're in a walnut tree watching a reflection. That podcast host you feel like you know personally? Reflection. That streamer who makes you feel seen? Reflection. They're performing. You're projecting. And somewhere in between those two things, you've created a relationship that only exists in your head. And look, I'm not saying connection isn't real or that media can't be meaningful, but when you start organizing your emotions around someone who has no idea you exist, you're deep in the branches, friend. Here's where it gets really uncomfortable. Pornography. The man in the story was watching what he thought was a real woman, building arousal and fantasy around an image that had no substance. Modern porn is the same mechanism on steroids. You're training your brain to become aroused by reflections, by performances, by people who aren't there and never will be. And then when you encounter an actual human with actual needs and boundaries and imperfections, your brain's like, wait, this doesn't match the prediction. And suddenly real intimacy feels disappointing compared to the illusion. You've been in the tree so long that the ground feels wrong. The counselor's wisdom in the story is the key to everything. He doesn't shame the man. He just names what happened. Desire creates illusion. And once you know that, once you really metabolize that truth, you can start catching yourself mid-climb. You can notice when you're filling in blanks that shouldn't be filled, when you're constructing narratives about people you barely know, when you're getting emotionally invested in reflections instead of reality. So here's the practical piece. How do you stop climbing trees? First, awareness. Notice when you're making up stories about people based on limited information. That coworker who smiled at you, maybe they're interested, maybe they're just friendly. Maybe they didn't even register you were there. Don't build a relationship on a smile. Second, reality testing. Before you invest hours of emotional energy into someone or something, check if there's actually water in the pool. Have a real conversation. Ask direct questions. Stop interpreting and start interacting. Third, sit with uncertainty. The man climbed the tree because he couldn't tolerate not knowing. He needed to see clearly, even if what he was seeing was wrong. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is say, "I don't know what this is yet," and be okay with that. And maybe most importantly, get out of your own head. The illusion lives entirely in your internal narrative. The moment you engage with actual reality, with actual people, the reflection loses its power. But you have to climb down. You have to be willing to discover that what you thought was there isn't. And that's scary, because it means grieving the fantasy. It means admitting you were wrong. It means those cramped hours in the tree were wasted. But here's what you gain. You gain the ground. Solid, real, actual ground where real connection lives. Where messy, imperfect, complicated humans exist. Where things aren't perfect, but they're real. And real turns out to be so much more satisfying than any reflection once you give it a chance. This is the metaphor mindset, where ancient storytellers become your therapists and walnut trees become warnings. If this hit home, if you recognized yourself perched in a tree somewhere staring at something that isn't there, here's what I need you to do. Smash that like button if you're ready to climb down and deal with reality. Subscribe and ring the bell because you deserve content that calls out your illusions with love. And share this with someone who's deep in the branches of their own fantasy. Sometimes we all need permission to admit we've been staring at nothing. The question is, what are you going to do now that you know? Stay in the tree or climb down and see what's actually real?